get quiet, just give me a holler. Okay, you're good, Carl? Okay, perfect. Well, my name's Erin, and I'm a local gal from this area. Not from Bella Vista, but I live here now, as do probably a lot of y'all, I'm assuming. But I'm from Siloam Springs, Arkansas, so not too far down the road. And I love this area so much. I've lived a lot of places. I have done a little bit of fly fishing, worked for Lewis and Clark for a little bit. We used to have a fly shop in there, which was kind of fun when we had that. Don't know if any of y'all remember that, or if you were here then, but they used to have one here in town. But yeah, I've kind of traveled around the world, lived a lot of places around the world, always find myself coming back to the Ozarks. I always miss it. I even went away to culinary school for a little bit in Hawaii, in Maui, and fell in love with the world out there. But I always found myself traveling up country to the horse pastures because they reminded me of the sights of home. So this is always a place I come back to. I think I'm back here to stay now. When I came back from Maui the last time after becoming a chef, which I am, I actually am a certified professional chef. I do private chef work, so I have my own life and don't work every night, holiday, and weekend for a restaurant. I just do my own thing. I came back and noticed nobody had written down our history of our heritage. I was working at the Peel Mansion at the time. Has anybody been to the Peel Mansion?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know that's an historical place built in about 1850 by Colonel Peel, who was, built it right after the Civil War. It's a really neat old home. If you haven't seen it, it's free. You can go through, and it's an Italianate mansion, like 16 rooms. There are ghosts in the house, many people believe. We used to always try to lock the door to the downstairs cellar, and man, that door just would not stay locked, so we just took the lock off. There were little dirty footprints coming up from the cellar all the time, walking in the house. Oh. Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, thank you. I'm not a good whistler, so I need that little sound effects. But, so when I was working out at the Peel Mansion, there was a publisher that would come by. You might have been around town. If you've been to Crystal Bridges, you've noticed there's a lot of books about Bentonville, Rogers. They're like little slim books about the size of mine. And they're written by local authors, right? So the publisher came through, and they're like, "Well, we'd like to sell this. We'd like you to sell this Fayetteville book here at the Peel Mansion." I was like, "Well, I don't know that selling a book about Fayetteville and the U of A is really a good fit for the store. But you know what would be a good fit is if somebody would write a book about the food history of the Ozarks, because I feel like a lot of people want to know about our culinary heritage, but nobody's written that down." And she's like, that's kind of interesting, because the publisher's out of South Carolina, so, I'm talking to some folks that aren't from the area. So I started describing how the book should be written. I find myself going, okay, well, you should interview this chef, and you should talk about this story, and you should probably put in these recipes, and you should do the history this way. And I started structuring out the chapters in my head. I'm describing this idea. I'm pitching her the idea, and then mid-flow, I realized, hey, I could write the book, and that's what I went ahead and told her. She's like, "You could?" I was like, "Well, I've done some food writing. I was out in Maui going to culinary school. I wrote for a magazine, did food critic reviews and stuff like that." She's like, "Well, I'll tell you what. Sounds like a great idea. Why don't you send me some samples of your writing, and we'll see if we can get this through." And I was like, "Okay." So I got a call from the publisher next day. "Hey, we hear you want to write us a book." I'm like, "Yeah, I want to write you a book." And they're like, "Well, go ahead and send on your stuff." They signed it. They approved it. I signed on the dotted line, and a 1.5-year adventure began. Writing a book, which I just always like to tell people how that comes about, because I know for some of y'all, you might want to write a book in your free time if you're thinking about it. It doesn't always go this way. I feel like God opened up a lot of doors for the book, and I just sort of have been following through ever since, really, to be quite honest. We came out with the book. I went all around the Ozarks interviewing people about the history of the area. So you could use it like a cookbook, and a lot of people do, but really it's a history book, and it has recipes in it. So a lot of the recipes have never, ever been written down. A lot of them have only been orally passed down by tradition, father to son, mother to daughter sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time drinking gallons of sweet tea and moonshine on occasion, getting some really good recipes. I had people bringing me out things in mason jars, and I had a feeling I knew what was in that mason jar. They wanted to share with me their homemade recipe. So that is one of the things that I did. And we may or may not get the screen back on, and if not, no big deal. But, yeah. Is it maybe the power's off on it? They too sometimes sit up. Maybe I have to hold it to get it going. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll just keep rolling. Okay. But yeah. Well, it's all right.
It's coming.
Hey, it's coming. It's coming. Build it and they will come, like Field of Dreams.
Get more cheese for the mouse.
And more cheese for the mouse. Yeah, so I will, that's great, thank you, that does help a lot. So these are the page proofs of my book. So I actually have my book in the back that I'll be selling afterwards. If anybody wants a copy, I can sign them and that sort of thing. But I'm going to take you a little bit through the book so you can just sort of know a little bit about what I wrote. And I'll keep an eye on my time. And when do I need to finish up? About 10:20, somewhere in there? Yeah. Thereabouts. And then I'll do question and answers after that. So in case y'all are coming up with some really good questions for me. I always get some fun questions from groups. And y'all are a fun group. I may even want to join. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Right? Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, I haven't fly fished in a while, but I figure you guys can, we can socialize.
Has Tom talked to you?
Pardon?
Has Tom
Tom's been talking to me, yeah. He charged me $10 to get in the first place. He told me to tell y'all that. Anyways, well, so, you know, you think about the Ozark folks. I'll just give you a little brief history about the Ozarks. I'll touch a little bit on Fish and Game, because I know you guys get to hear a lot about Fish and Game, but I wanted to touch on a few other things. So, you know, these people are pretty hardy folk. I mean, there's people with field clearing tools. Here's men that caught a possum hunt, which I kind of like this great possum hunt. I think it's probably early 1900s, judging from the clothes. You notice it's such a big deal. 2 photographers showed up, the guy in the picture and the one taking it. Now, as far as the Ozarks go, you know, is anybody from this area like me? I'm just curious. We got anybody from here? All right, one in the back, red hat. All right, cool. And everybody else has moved here from somewhere else, obviously. So for a lot of folks that end up getting my book, it's nice for them because they get to kind of become acquainted with what the Ozarks are all about. In the first chapter, I just start to say Northwest Arkansas begins in the Ozark Mountains. These rugged mountains are set apart from the rest of the natural state, just like the rugged people who first called it home. Northwest Arkansas's early settlers lived in isolation for many years, carving out a plot to grow food in an unreachable and densely forested land. So, like, geographically, we've got a lot of dolomite, limestone, we've got a lot of hickory trees, we've got a lot of things that are actually parts of, if you've driven around Arkansas or even seen any of, like, the rock formations, you'll notice that there are actually fossils and seashells in the rock. That's because this place was once, you know, the guardian of an ancient inland sea. There was an inland sea many, many, many years ago here in Arkansas, so you can still see evidence of that even in driving around. So now when the first hillbillies or hill folk came here only by foot or on mule, they found this almost like never land of uncharted territory that nobody had really discovered. A lot of people would avoid Northwest Arkansas for a lot of reasons. Now, can you all still hear me pretty well in the back? Fly tires, you guys are good? Okay. Well, you're all fly tires, but the fly tires specifically in the back. Little joke. Okay. You know, but yeah, so people would come here only if they really wanted to come here. Because if you think about it, they would go up north through Missouri or down south through Louisiana, avoiding pretty much the state of Arkansas altogether, trying to get across the continent. Now, on the eastern side, we had the Delta swamps. And during the time that people were trying to, you know, considering settlement here, the swamps were not an appealing place. You would want to avoid the swamps if your life depended on it. We had issues of malaria happening all along the Mississippi River on the eastern side of Arkansas. So many people actually ended up moving here away from little plantations that were along that eastern side. Like, has anyone been to Taneytown? I'm sure most people have. You know, those people were settled because they were moved over from a plantation where they were dying, Sunnyside Plantation along that eastern side of Arkansas. Pietro Bandini, a New York priest, moved them up and found a new way of life for them up in Taneytown where they could actually survive and start to live in the new world, making their own way of life. So that's why Taneytown has a lot of old settlers. But originally, people would avoid that side of Arkansas. They would avoid Northwest Arkansas, specifically traveling here because it was considered Indian territory. The Cherokee and the Osage actually fought over it as a hunting ground. Now, when I've looked through old pictures, just like dabbling around in, you know, figuring out what Northwest Arkansas is all about, I come across a lot of old hunting pictures, fish and game pictures, because really that was the primary source of food here. I love this picture of this lady hunting here along the White River, probably before they flooded it from Beaver Lake. But you see, even women were shooting guns, learning how to hunt around here. This place was just wild, you know, just wild. So you really wouldn't want to come here unless you know, were being very intentional. So people would go up north through Missouri, down south of Louisiana, forget about Arkansas, skip it all together. We received railroad and telegraph lines here 50 years later than the rest of the country. We've always been behind because of the image, the stereotype, and the hard-to-reach, like, lands that we have here in the Ozarks. So because of that, you know, living here in the Ozarks, people had to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. We have entrepreneurs that have made their way here. As you all know, I mean, we have a lot of wealth here now. But I think that's due to the entrepreneurial spirit of the rugged people that lived here. So I feel like that's kind of in a nutshell a little bit about the Ozarks. Now, as far as the Ozark food goes, it's really interesting. When people would come here to visit, they actually didn't send back very positive reports up north where people were writing the newspaper. So that's how we got sort of the image of the hillbilly stereotype. Has anyone ever like went back home and people were like, you live in Arkansas now? Why would you move there? Do y'all wear shoes? I remember when I first met my grandma from Colorado a little later in life, she was checking my teeth, you know. I was like, I promise these are all my real ones, you know. She really had bought into this Ozark stereotype, you know, which really was built upon like Little Abner and Branson and, you know, like this whole idea that these people are very backwards. Well, that started out with a negative report probably in the early 1800s. Henry Rowe Schoolcraft coming over here. He was a northern, what I would call like a greenhorn. He was a man from up in New York City. He didn't really know how to hunt or fish or shoot a gun at all, even for self-protection. He came down here to the Ozark wilds and wanted to write about it. He ended up staying with a lot of folks that took him in under their wing for a good thing. They probably saved his life quite a few times. But the kinds of reports he would send back up north, which got all around the U.S., all around the country about Arkansas, is what sort of started to shape the negative stereotype. So, you know, he would write things like, even though he was receiving free food at people's hospitality, he would say every meal, where it be breakfast, dinner, or supper, consists of the worst possible coffee, indifferent, dirty, frothy-looking butter, black sugar or honey, as the case may be, a little bacon, or some sort of dried meat or cooked I do not know how, and as tough as leather, and miserably made Indian cornbread. You know, I mean, he wasn't real favorable. He consisted later talking about the supper consisted of some pieces of dirty-looking fried pork, cornbread 8 days old, mixed up with lumps of dirt, and coffee made of burnt acorns and maize. Now, I appreciate this coffee does not taste like burnt acorns and maize to me. It's pretty good. But they had neither milk, sugar, nor butter. Well, of course we didn't, because we didn't have dairy cows out here. You know, I mean, people were just living off the land, making their own way. There was enough that the land served up that people didn't have to start farming or bringing in dairy cattle or anything like that until much later if they wanted to. Later on, when he almost died of starvation exposure many times, and many people saved him, including a woman that would teach him how to shoot a gun, he wrote about the White River Valley people, which would be us now, this northwest Arkansas area, that they were hardy, brave, independent people, frank and generous, further commenting that these Ozark men could form the most efficient military corps in frontier warfare which can possibly exist. So, yes, he changed his tune. He could see the independent spirit. Other people that came back went back to Germany. There was one man that came over, found the Boston Mountains, which would be north of Fayetteville, of northwest Arkansas, to be the place of Rousseau's natural man, a solace from civilization, which is maybe why all of us are here, right? We live in Bella Vista. We know it's a solace from civilization. It's wonderful. He lamented in 1842 upon his departure, of all I had seen in America, Arkansas was the one which pleased me most. I may perhaps never see it again, but I shall never forget the happy days I passed there, where many a true heart beats under a coarse frock or a leather hunting shirt. So I feel like when people would come here, they would find this as almost like a solace from civilization, a step away from materialism. And what they found here as far as food goes was just amazing. I mean, you all know, you guys all fish. So you understand, you know how to take care of the land. I feel like hunters and fishermen are the people that care the most about the land and its preservation. In fact, whenever I launched this book, the first place I launched it, whenever it came out in 2017, I walked my little Red Ryder wagon down to the squirrel cook-off in Bentonville, and that's where I started selling the books out of. And I have recipes for squirrel in the book. But I wanted to let you know, in case you haven't come across it in your fishing experiences, what is High South or Ozark cuisine, and here's what I would say. So here, what is the High South style? Which, you know, they serve, it's kind of fancy at Crystal Bridges and whatnot, but really it's Ozark food. So you want to start with the fresh water out of the limestone, and you add in it all that grows near it. Persimmon, poke salad, watercress, dandelion weed, walnut and hickory trees with their nuts, lamb's quarter, wild morels, onions, and berries. And in the waters of the fresh springs, you got to fish out our crawdads, our Ozark lobster, you know. Little ones. Catfish, perch, crappie, some of the best trout you've ever tasted. Bass, shad, frogs, and striper fish. And people aren't the only ones competing for this food, though. You know, you got to think about the bears out there in the wilderness. In fact, we used to be known as the Bear State. Now, historically, people used to eat bear around here, too. In fact, there was one town that was known as Oil Trough, and they would ship barrels, wooden barrels of bear grease all the way down the White River so it could get to people's towns to light their lanterns with. So I don't know if oil troughs still exist today, but it was so named because we had so many dang bears. So there you go. So you might be dealing with the bears. You might also find some venison on the Ozark plate, along with possum, rabbit, squirrel, and hog. Our razorbacks were, another name for razorbacks were hazel splitters. They were the wild boars people found out in the woods, that they would come across in the early settlement days. I'm thinking it had a little bit to do with naming our state mascot. But, and then fowl was also abundant: wild turkey, chicken, quail, pheasant, and an occasional duck, and goose. So, I was actually I was taking apart goose yesterday. I'm teaching a cooking class tonight, and I am making duck. So that'll be fun. Did not know the heads would still be attached whenever I opened the frozen duck I'd gotten from the Chinese store. That was fun, I got pictures if anybody wants to see those later, if you've got a strong stomach, that is, I can take the head off a fish, no problem. I don't feel attached to the fish. A duck, I feel a little bit more personal. So anyways, so those are some of the foods, that would make up Ozark cuisine, But as far as like checking it out, I came across so many fish and game pictures in my research. I made it very clear that the fish and game was really the prevalent, dominant food source of the Ozarks. I love these guys here, these young boys. Look, they've got a whole slew of rabbits there. That's got to be a wintertime shot. Now, I came across a lot of interesting people on this journey. Besides, fish and game, I mean, corn gets its own chapter. It just does, in its solid and its liquid forms, In fact, they say in the 1900s, farmers spent about half their time converting their corn crops to liquid form. So I actually have an old moonshine recipe in here, and I'm not even kidding. It is from, I know, I'm telling you. I know, it is from the 1930s. Now, the gentleman that I interviewed told me not to put his name on here. He's not too proud of those days. But there it is, 50 pounds of sugar, corn chops, 35 gallons of water. You're going to line that barrel with sawdust, and you're going to leave it out in the woods for a bit. One of the stories he told me about making corn shine, and I also do have some variations here in case you want to make a Razor Jack, which is raisins or peach brandy. You can do that. This is legit. But he told me, I remember back in the day when I had to make moonshine, because you just had to make ends meet. He's like, I was doing pretty well. Bought some patent leather white shoes, just kind of fancy for here in the Ozarks. And he was working out in the woods on the still, and a revenuer came upon him. And he said, man, I lit out. I hit that trail. And I'm just cutting up with him. We're having some sweet tea over, a nice meal. He's just cracking up, telling me the story that he remembers. He's like, yeah. Man, that guy was on my tail, and he's like, I got all the way back to the cabin. He's like, my dad's like, throw those shoes in the furnace. He's like, Dad, I just bought these. He's like, anybody in town's going to know. If the guy with the white shoes is the one out with the moonshine still, you're going to get yourself in so much trouble. So he had to burn up those white shoes, but he never did get caught, and he lived to tell me the story about his moonshine. So, even so, there's, look at this. I mean, I even found old pictures that you never find. Like, that's actually somebody drinking moonshine. This wouldn't have been often photographed. A lot of my photographs I found, almost all of them, were all outdoors of the Ozarks. People spent so much time cooking outside, hunting and fishing outside. There weren't a lot of outdoor or indoor pictures, and also people didn't have the money to bring in a photographer to take pictures. Now, we were all pretty poor around here, but we didn't know any better, right? Like, everybody was in the same boat. The chicken that you all hear about, like Simmons and Tyson, that all came in later after the apple years. Do y'all know that we used to supply the nation's apples from the 1890s to the 1920s? Little old Northwest Arkansas. Proof of it's in the pudding. Here you go. So, this is apple processing at Rauscher's Orchards near Fairmount in 1900, which is right near my hometown of Silent Springs. Now, you can see you've got some ladies here working the machines in the middle. They're going to peel the apples. Now, a lot of the peels go into wooden barrels where they get turned into apple cider vinegar. Now, we used to have apple processing plants all the way down Emma Avenue in Springdale, and that's why the railroad's there. Same thing for downtown Rogers. If you've noticed the railroad, the Frisco station right there, all those railroad tracks were laid so that people could ship boxcars of apples all around the country. Now, we don't do that anymore because a lot of things happen in the apple years, but I mean, check it out. Look at this is the packing scene there. That's just little old Rogers right there at the bottom. That one's Mr. Brown's farm. Now, there's a cidery that's open now in downtown Springdale that's trying to bring back the apple seed, but it takes a while to regrow apple orchards. So we had apple orchards all over Siloam Springs, where I'm from, Here's just an example of what the landscape used to look like around here. Apple orchards, far as you can see, as well as peach trees and strawberries, that sort of thing. We had a lot of fruit grown out of northwest Arkansas. So from the 1890s to the 1920s, every brown paper sack that was opened on Christmas morning by a kid, they'd find a peppermint, an orange, and probably an apple from Arkansas inside. Because our apples, like the Arkansas black apple, which you probably heard about, as well as some of the other varietals that are now kind of extinct, they could last up to 3 months without refrigeration, which we didn't have then, and they could ship in boxcars and not get dented or bruised. So they could literally get shipped all around the country. They'd still be good to eat on December when they were picked in September. So that was the thing with the Arkansas apple. It was a really special apple. And people used apples for all variety of needs, and of course making apple cider, vinegar, all those things were coming out of Arkansas apples. Now what happened in the 1920s, we have the Great Depression. We also have an apple blight that blew through the area and wiped out a lot of the trees. We have farmers that didn't have much money to then replant and start a whole new crop of apples or replant their orchards and wait 4 to 5 years for the first tree to produce. So we have all these chopped down apple trees, and what comes in? The chicken opportunity, the chicken industry. So if you drive around Arkansas and hold your nose and drive around the back roads off of 49, you'll find a lot of chicken houses. And underneath those chicken houses, I guarantee you, are the seeds of apple orchards underneath the ground where all those trees have been chopped down. And that's why you can't find apple orchards in the Ozarks anymore. Even Lincoln, little old Lincoln, was known as the apple capital of Arkansas. They still have the apple festival every year, and they have very few trees in the town, which is ironic. The railroad lines literally run through the middle of the square where they would have shipped apples out there. They're trying to bring the trees back. Cane Hill's trying to bring the trees back. They're trying to produce apples to support black apple cidery in downtown Springdale. So if you do like hard cider, they're making it the hard way, the real way, at Black Apple Crossing in downtown Springdale in Don Tyson's old office. It's very ironic that the chicken apple thing has come around full circle, so to speak, But I love that we used to, supply the nation with apples. If you've been to Taneytown, you might have even noticed that there are quite a few vineyards if you drive off the back roads a little bit in Taneytown. If you drive off the back roads in Taneytown, you can actually find evidence of vineyards. Now, this is little old Gentry. If you've been to Gentry, one of my favorite restaurants is out there, the Wooden Spoon. But there used to be, yeah, it's pretty good. And actually, they let me interview them for the book. So I watched them make 365 Thanksgiving pies the day before Thanksgiving in one night. Yeah, we started out with a steak dinner. I was like, don't we need to get in the kitchen? And so we're eating, and then we get in the kitchen, and they've got it all worked out, like the logistics. And those people churn out amazing pies. They gave me their apple pie recipe. It's in the book. I have a lot of proprietary recipes that usually most restaurants don't give out, but I worked on them a little bit, and we got some good recipes in here. But so little old Gentry here, we have some orchards, and I don't probably get close on time, so I'll kind of wind it down. This is just a little snapshot. I could talk to you for hours, obviously, on what all's in here. Yeah, we actually supplied Welch's grape jelly. The Concord grape jelly. Taneytown used to be the main seller to Welch's, and they would sell the Concord grapes. Now, we don't have the right climate really to grow Concord grapes. We can, but we have a really high humidity here if you haven't noticed. And Beth, I don't know if you ever feel like your hair's just not doing what it needs to do. And it's just that humidity that has a high mold count in the air, so only the hardiest grape survives, just like the hardiest people survive. So the Concord grapes would often get enough mold that Welch's pulled out, and they started buying grapes from up north where they could get a more consistent product. But that meant that the people in Taneytown that had bet the farm quite literally on Welch's buying their grapes had to end up selling the vineyards, which is why there's not as many vineyards in Taneytown as there used to be. So again, a little bit of that history. Vineyards used to dot northwest Arkansas, as well as lots of other things. So just a little scoop of that. I'll end with that picture. You can see that's out near Silent Springs on Live On Farm out in Lake Francis. So we just used to have a lot of different foods growing around here. And I just love the Ozarks. It's my home. And I will take some questions. I just wanted to let y'all know there's more in this book than what I shared because 20 minutes is a short time. But if you do want a copy, I sell them for $20 cash or check, or I have a $21 on I could do a credit card thing, too in the back. So, and these are great Christmas presents, and I can sign it. So, what questions do I have?